At that point in time, I was in a very dark place. I mean, it was very depressing going from nothing to being like, hey, I'm the man, the most successful guy, at my age, blah, blah, and then back to like getting, starting to lose everything. But what ended up happening was, for example, with those mortgages, those banks went under, they got, absorbed and serviced by somebody else, and then they came back and I got modifications, and my rates were 9 to 11% range, and they dropped them to 2%.
Welcome to the Real Freedom Show, where we inspire you to pursue your passion to gain time and financial freedom through opportunities in real estate. I'm your host, Mike Swenson. Let's get some real freedom together. Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Real Freedom, Real Estate Leveraged Freedom, where we talk about different ways that people build and grow their financial freedom and also achieve time freedom through different opportunities in real estate. I'm your host, Mike Swenson. If you want to get started or research ways that you can get started on your real estate journey, go check out our website, freedomthroughrealestate.com. That's freedomthroughrealestate.com. We post all of our content there, episodes, articles, really just sharing stories of people in their entrepreneurial journey through real estate and just finding ways to build the life that they want. And so that's why we do this podcast, and so excited to share different stories. And I've got awesome story to be able to share today. We've got Matin Haghkar here, a great story of kind of coming from nothing, building and growing, going through the subprime mortgage crisis, being able to experience that. But Matin is owner of Remax Plus in the Philadelphia area and also has his own real estate team, has rental properties, and does a lot of different things. And so Matin, I'll let you kind of share all of your accolades and your journey as we go, but we're so excited to have you on the show.
Great. No, I really appreciate it, Mike. Thank you for having me. So I've been in the real estate business just over 20 years. We have a Remax franchise with about 50 realtors. We have a property management business with over 1,000 units under management. We have a mortgage business, development business. Like you said, own a bunch of my own properties and started from nothing and just grew it to where it is today. So definitely very proud of that. And, we're ranked in the top 5% of our MLS. So we do well with sales and volume and all that kind of stuff, and very active for sure.
It's a hard journey, and especially in today's real estate market, it feels like you're kind of running uphill here to be able to continue to build and grow. But talk about those early days. What I always am curious to hear is kind of why real estate. What is it going to do for you? Is it purposeful? Is it accidental when you kind of get started? And then we'd love to just continue to build that story and go as the episode goes on.
Sure. So, like I mentioned, started with a very modest background. And, I think the problem a lot of people have today, younger people especially, is they don't know what they want to do. They're kind of exploring too many options, all that kind of stuff. And, that you can get analysis paralysis and overwhelmed thinking like that. And, coming from nothing, my priorities were really simple and what I wanted and my goals and my direction was easy, where it was like, hey, look, I don't want to be poor anymore and I want to own a house because we didn't have a house, living in a shoebox apartment, that kind of thing. So it was really clear and simple from an early age. So going down that path, early on in high school, my brother introduced me to Rich Dad, Poor Dad. So, of course, everybody mentions that, but that was a big part of shifting the mindset and, really believing like anything is possible. And you can kind of go from nothing to something, especially in America, we're blessed to live in this country. So, it really is the land of opportunity. But, growing up from nothing, I actually bought my first property in high school when I turned 18. Now, keep in mind, that was before the subprime crisis, no doc, low income, all that kind of stuff. My rates were high. But bought up my first property. That was a great experience. Then I went to college at Drexel University, studied engineering, bought more and more properties there, rented it to my friends. I lived one, bought another one, kept renting. And then soon, a lot of my friends and their families and parents knew I was in the business, knew I had my license. And I got my license actually freshman year of college. So I started doing deals for my friends and their family. And, I was born and raised in and around the Philadelphia area. So I had, all my friends from high school, middle school, all that. So that was definitely a big help being from here. But one thing led to the other, grew the business, bought more and more properties. And of course, the mortgage crisis happened. It was definitely a tough time. Lost a lot, some properties, still kept some. It was very challenging. And there's a whole, I can go on and on about that, take the whole episode. But, from there, like I said, there was a lot of pain, but a lot of good things also came out of it afterwards. But then after that, I kept my license open and I continued with just buying and selling for other people, myself, etc. and I was working as a full-time civil engineer at the same time. And it got to the point where my real estate business got so busy, I couldn't really do both. And at the same time, Remax came to me and offered me the franchise. So I took that opportunity, opened the business in about 2015. And from there, I quit my job, just focused on that. Me and my girlfriend at the time, now my wife, we just grew the business, recruited more agents, bought more properties, got, other property management business, and just kept growing everything across the board. And, as we started doing more volume, then, okay, it made sense to have a, mortgage business, title affiliation, and, a development business that we started building more properties.
Exciting to hear how that grows. And yeah, would love to talk just a little bit, just because you do have the experience kind of going through that difficult process with, the mortgage crisis, and maybe how that impacted your business, how you had to maybe think on your feet, shift and adjust. Because I think a lot of times, especially when we talk about things in real estate, we're always talking about our accomplishments and all the, X amount of volume, X amount of properties and all that, which is certainly fantastic. But I think also what makes people successful is being able to move through problems, problem solve, put solutions in place, and recognizing it doesn't always turn out fantastic, right? There's tough decisions that have to be made, there's difficult challenges. And, I heard a podcast recently where somebody said, "Hey, who here would want to 10x their income?" And he's like, obviously, everybody raises their hands. And he says, "Well, what if that means you have to 10x all your problems to get 10x the income?" And he's like, a lot of times those hands go down because they don't realize, if I want 10x the income, I might have to endure 10x the problems to be able to make that happen. I want less problems and 10x the money. It doesn't always work that way. So I'd love to kind of hear maybe how you've shifted or adjusted, or had to make some decisions to be able to move through some difficult, challenging times.
Sure. So, and a lot of this comes with age. And, just to put things in perspective, when I was 21, I had over 21 properties. I was like a multi-millionaire many times over. So I was, I was I started getting overly confident, you could say, and, having too much self-belief and thinking anything I touched would turn into gold. And then the crisis happened. And basically, I'll give you a couple examples where, I was investing in, I was buying a lot of properties, and I was, like I said, everything was going up. I thought I was the man, super smart. And then, I bought, and one example is I bought a new construction property as an investment in Virginia. And these properties were like 700,000-ish, Toll Brothers, new development. And you had to show up at like 5 in the morning to be able to get on the list to get a house. And it was like every weekend there was a line. The prices were going up like 25, 30 grand a month. And it was, and I finally got one locked in, and it wasn't going to be finished for a year. And I was like, wow, I'm making 25, 30 grand a month. As soon as it's done, I'm going to sell it. This is amazing. But of course, as soon as it got done, I bought it and closed. And that same day, it's like luck. The crisis kind of that happened around that same time, and Toll Brothers dumped 60 identical houses on the market at the same time. So I got stuck in that, eventually got out of it, took a big haircut. And, other situations, I took, like I said, I took out a lot of no doc mortgages, and everything was loosey goosey at the time with the mortgage brokers and the appraisers. We all know how that went. And some of them, the banks were actually going under, and I'm sure your audience knows some of them, like GMAC, New Century, some of those big banks back then. But they started going under, and they called me and said, "Hey, we know you didn't fill out your application right. You did XYZ wrong, whatever, and we're calling the loan due, and we're going to foreclose on you unless you come up with the money within a week, 2 weeks, whatever." And of course, the world's crashing financially. I'm stressed, my heart's beating fast. I'm looking in every direction to get money to pay these off, and nobody was lending at the time. So I was like, "Hey, look, I'm throwing my hands up. There's nothing I can do here, et cetera, et cetera." And then eventually, and at that point in time, I was in a very dark space, dark place. I mean, it was very depressing going from nothing to being like, "Hey, I'm the man, the most successful guy, at my age, blah, blah," and then back to like getting, starting to lose everything. But what ended up happening was, for example, with those mortgages, those banks went under, they got, absorbed and serviced by somebody else, and then they came back and I got modifications, and my rates were 9 to 11% range, and they dropped them to 2%. And I was getting rent enough to pay the 9 or 11% interest, but now that the 2% interest is going on, the rent is still the same amount. So it ended up being a great, great event. But at the time I was very, stressed, upset, whatever. And I think the biggest thing that I realize now, back then I was 21, now I'm 39, is, it's never as bad as it seems, and it's never as good as it seems. And, everything now that I'm this age, it's like almost everything bad that has happened in my life, has kind of ended up in the long run being somewhat positive. And, I think every situation, it's kind of what you make of it. Not just a learning experience, but there's sometimes opportunity in those situations too. So, I think it's really easy to say, like, when you're in high school and you break up with your first girlfriend, it's like the end of the world. And, it's kind of that attitude. But then when you get older, you kind of shrug things off a little better. But, that I think I've finally learned that lesson where it's like, hey, it's never as good as it seems, but it's also never as bad as it seems. Don't get too sure of, things going good, and don't get too upset when things go bad.
So you had mentioned, Remax came to you and decided to open a franchise. Curious to hear kind of how that decision works or kind of how that process worked for you. And you were able to fit in going from, agent, or I guess I don't know for sure, team at the time, to now being, brokerage. That's obviously a big adjustment. So maybe kind of talk through some things in that phase and how you're able to adjust through that.
Sure. So that's another one of those things where, so basically they scouted me out based on experience, sales volume, age, whatever, that kind of thing.
Looks, right? Good
Yeah,
looks.
I'll take that as a compliment. Thanks. But across the board, and they were like, "Hey, you're a good fit," and they were doing an expansion, selling a lot of franchises at the time. And in my mind, being a little naive, and when I opened the franchise, I was still, in my 20s, so still young, and I had a lot of business experience before that and corporate experience, but still young, trying to start a new business. And long story short, thinking of it, it's like, oh wow, I opened my own brokerage and I get 100% commission split minus the haircut from the, franchise, whatever. But then when you add up all the overhead, operating costs, liability, etc., you actually end up getting a much worse split. So, you really have to do a crazy amount of volume to make it make sense to have a brokerage because, they have that old saying, brokerage stands for broke, right? Where it's very difficult and unfortunately, and the business has shifted a lot. When I first started, 2004 or 5, the commission splits were like 50-50 for realtors, roughly. If you were good, you got a little more, whatever. And those splits have consistently gone up for agents. Just it's become like a race to the bottom. So the broker has to give out more and more and more, and eventually you're like, hey, I'm actually breaking even on the agents or losing money. And then, on the other end, the sales commissions have gone down too. So it used to be 6, 5.5, 5, plus or minus, whatever. So both sides pressure. And like I said, there's so many brokerages offering so many high incentives where for us to survive, we've had to give extremely aggressive splits. Especially if you're a high volume performer, you can go anywhere and get whatever you want. So we give them very high quality service, very low splits. They keep most of their money. And the brokerage has almost become, even though we crush it with sales, like if you look at our numbers, you're like, wow, these guys must make a lot of money, but it almost breaks even.
Hmm.
But going back to just, recognizing opportunity, okay, we have this business, but it creates a lot of auxiliary business, and it's almost become like a marketing arm for mortgage, for title, for development, for property management. And the property management business has been doing fantastic. But it's almost become like a marketing arm from all those businesses. And that's kind of with most brokerages across the board. They've almost become this like dispatch auxiliary marketing business that dispatches to all these other places. But if you're thinking that you're going to get into it and start a brokerage and you're making a bunch of money on all your agents and all these commissions, like you have a lot to learn because it's you definitely have a huge overhead with rent, admin, staff, all that stuff. It really adds up.
And two, for you, going from kind of being responsible for just yourself to now being responsible for others, there's a lot of challenge there, and putting your license on the line on behalf of others. And so, I remember even early on when I got into real estate, I started, full time in 2014. I was kind of thinking like, that brokerage thing, that sounds really tough. That's a really tough thing to be a part of. And I know when I have a problem, I call my broker and they better answer. And so to be on the other end of that, that's definitely difficult. But I can see how it's a platform for opportunity in the future versus, an investment opportunity. Are you looking to get started or scale in real estate investing but don't know your next step? Are you overwhelmed thinking about finding deals, analyzing deals, doing due diligence, and managing properties on top of it? Go ahead and push the easy button and invest with us. Real estate investing is what we do full time. We've done dozens of deals with hundreds of doors. We have the knowledge and experience to handpick the best deals that most investors can't find. We've got large off-market deals all the time where you can hopefully find returns and economies of scale that you just can't find on your own. The best thing is it's 100% passive to you for less capital than you put down trying to acquire a property on your own. Don't let this year go by where you don't make the leap, add to your portfolio, or you just sit in analysis by paralysis. To find out more, visit freedomthroughrealestate.com and click on invest. You can book a call and learn more there. So get to scaling your portfolio now with us by your side. You had mentioned, the mortgage and the title and property manage and all that. Obviously, it takes a lot of staff to be able to run that. So for you as an entrepreneur, maybe talk through that process of building and scaling and adding to your team as these opportunities have come up throughout your career.
Yeah, so that's definitely one of the most challenging parts. And we're very lucky right now. We have like a stellar team, and I'm really, really happy with them. But it took, 20 years to build that. And, when we first started, it's very challenging because when you first start, you don't have a lot of business, so you can't afford to hire the best of the best. So when we first started, it was kind of like people I knew through the business and friends and whatever, and maybe they weren't the best. At that point in time, in my opinion, they were the best, hindsight, whatever. But we've had to hire and fire many people to get to where we are now. And, now we have a big business where we can afford to pay the best and they are the best. But when you first start, when you don't have a big business, it's either you have a huge negative return because you're spending so much money on overhead with the salaries, or you don't get the best quality people. So that is very challenging and a lot of stress and heartburn. And I can't tell you, how many hundreds of thousands of dollars we've lost through that process. But it's definitely challenging. And I think, making sure, there's a couple angles to it where, you want people that are, super ambitious and have your ethos in line. Where, one of the biggest things for us is we never do a deal for somebody that we wouldn't do for ourselves. We're very honest about it. We talk people out of buying and selling all the time, even if it's bad for our pocket and our commission. But it's led to clients that have referred us so much business and they buy every deal through us in the long run. So having that mindset is super important to us. And, the loyalty side, all that kind of stuff. But, sometimes you can get people that are overly ambitious. And we've had this before where they kind of use you as a stepping stone. They come in, they kind of put your business on the second tier, but they're really building their own business on the side, and that's their top priority, and they don't spend time on your business. So you have to be careful, but as long as you get people that, hey, look, like I have your back, I'm sharing all the stress and risk, we're in it together, and this is how we do business. It's been amazing. We're very lucky.
Now, out of curiosity, how much, as you have your hands in multiple businesses and multiple kind of sub industries here of real estate, how much do they each kind of operate in their own silo versus maybe having some continuity between the businesses where you can maybe share services, share time, share resources together?
Yeah, so there's a lot of synergy there. From the brokerage side, we're constantly referring management business, and from the management side, so it's two separate businesses. One is Remax Plus, and one is Plus Property Management, and they both have separate staff. Plus Property Management has so got about five full-time staff and maybe three maintenance guys that are full-time. And then we have an accounting firm that is a subcontractor that we use to, for 1099s, managing Appfolio, QuickBooks, all that stuff. And those agents that are on that staff are also licensed with the brokerage. So so part of the incentive is, hey, if a property management client wants to sell a property, that's your deal. You can get that. That's your listing, buy or whatever. And, from each of these businesses, like I said, we have really good staff. So, honestly, we give most of the income back to them for helping service the business. And on our end, we make a small percentage. But that's what it takes to, in my opinion, get the best of the best and have them want to have skin in the game, all that kind of stuff. And then on the brokerage side, they both do leasing. They do leasing for, property manager says leasing for property management properties. And, from their sales side, we have 50 realtors that are constantly giving property management leads, leasing service, whatever. And we have a lot of incentives and referral bonuses set up where, hey, if you give property management a lead, they give you a referral as a licensed agent and all that kind of stuff. So everybody's really happy with it. And, one thing is, property management has a lot of headaches and liability. So as a brokerage, you also don't want to have, multiple agents trying to run their different property management businesses and all that stuff and get high liability, very messy. And it's also in property management, in my opinion, it's not worth it unless you're managing like 50 units plus. because you're making, $50, $100 per unit. It doesn't make sense for the headache and liability. So for an agent to say, hey, I want to start a management business to manage 2 or 3 properties, well, hey, why don't you just refer it to them? They'll give you a cut. It doesn't make sense financially for you to start your own business. And that's been great. And then development, we get constant leads for the development business from these clients as well. And from the development side, we usually honestly don't even take outside customers much. We usually just develop our own properties or for somebody that we have a close relationship that we've known for a long time. So that's the development side. And then I should say this too, we're soon starting a locksmith business too. And we're buying the truck, getting the insurance, all that stuff. But that's been a service where, hey, we have so many locks, we need that service all the time. Okay, it makes sense now to start that as well. And then the mortgage side, um, each one of these, they have a high level director where I'm not super involved on the day to day, but I do get involved if there's a big problem, like, hey, this building caught fire, or we have, the cops at this building, or, whatever. But if it's a big problem or some legal thing, I'll get involved. But typically they're pretty self-sufficient unless they need some guidance on something and want to get my opinion. That's always something that comes up all the time. But they're pretty self-sufficient. Like mortgage is completely self-sufficient. I'm just like a silent partner. Brokerage is I'm pretty involved, and property management is just if there's major issues.
Now, for those businesses, how intentional were you about pursuing those opportunities? Or was it just kind of opportunities that came to you, or maybe relationships that you've cultivated where it's like, hey, let's think about doing this together? Because I think sometimes people are curious to hear how those multiple businesses come. Some people, it's like, hey, this is my 30-year plan and I'm in year 3 and I want to do this, this, and this. And for some people, it's kind of like, hey, we're just having a conversation, brainstorming, and hey, wouldn't it make sense to do this? And oh, we know so and so. And so curious to kind of hear how much of it was really intentionality versus just kind of stuff that more organically maybe happened.
Yeah, so with property management, originally, it was like 20, 30 units. I was managing it all myself. And then I hired, and then I didn't want to do it anymore. I was like, hey, look, it doesn't make a lot of money. It's a lot of headaches. I'd rather have somebody else do it. So I hired a company, and as within months, our vacancy was up. We had more than normal maintenance, all that stuff. So I fired them and I hired another one, and they did the same thing. And then I hired another one, same thing. And I was like, all right, screw this. We need to do it ourselves. So brought in a couple buddies and people that were in the business. We did the management ourselves, and that was natural because we couldn't find somebody that could handle it. And of course, we're going to lose our customers, and most of the properties were my own, so I couldn't afford to have vacancies because I had mortgages, all that stuff. So we ended up doing it ourselves because we just couldn't find a good one. And then the brokerage and it happened naturally with Remax recruiting us, and then going down the pipeline. I think you have to really be honest and look at your business. And looking at our business, like I said, the brokerage doesn't make a lot of income net, but it has a huge volume and a lot of transactions. So what are other ways to monetize that, or figure that out where I'm not one of those people that says, okay, I'm going to shut the doors, I'm going out of business because it doesn't make sense, whatever. And pride can be a good thing or bad thing, but that's pride talking right there. It's like, hey, I'm not gonna let everybody in the world see that I gave up or whatever. That, like I said, sometimes can be good or bad, but that kind of forces you to think outside the box. And it wasn't like, okay, we're not making any money and there's no volume, right? There's a lot of volume, but we're making no money. So how do we milk each transaction and get a little bit more? And long story short, having the relationship with the mortgage company, title, development, property management does help us give better service to our customers too. So it's a win-win. They get better service, they get better deals, and we also make a little more on each transaction.
In terms of these different businesses, I know you mentioned you had great directors. Where do you spend the majority of your time, on a given week? Is it mostly just high level leadership growth? Is it, bopping in, kind of hands in to a few of the different businesses, or what's a week look like for you?
Sure. So it's really all over the place. It's really hard to say like what I'm doing each week because it's like I don't even put anything on my calendars on Mondays because it's always crazy. For example, it's like something in the air where it's like a million phone calls and emergencies, whatever. So it's kind of like constantly, I would say on a daily basis I'll get like 1 or 2 calls from agents talking about an issue they're having on a deal. I'll get 1 or 2 calls from management, something that they need ideas on or direction. And then, from the brokerage side, a couple calls there, hey, this deal, how to process this, whatever. And then, on the development side, I am constantly meeting with, So the part that is my passion, what I like to do, is the development side and buying and owning real estate. So I try to put most of my time there while trying to keep everything else moving in the right direction. So from that end, I'm constantly meeting with architects, township meetings, engineers, that kind of thing, just because that's my passion. That's where I want to focus on. But those other businesses, they're pretty self-sufficient. And, as far as like, we have trainers, we have recruiters, we have all that kind of stuff. But as far as recruiting agents and developing agents and all that kind of stuff, we used to do a lot of that, but then it started to seem like, for the most part, not to say it's a waste of time, but it wasn't a super efficient way of using your time because, you'll put all this time into someone and then they'll decide to switch careers or they're like, hey, this is, not for me, whatever. And, there's too many, I think, licensed agents, I'm sure you know, and everybody knows, there's too many people that are licensed. The barrier to entry is too low. So because of that, you have a revolving door of people getting in and out. So trying to train and coach people is not a super high priority, but if people show incentive and they're willing to do it, hey, we'll put the time in if you're willing to put the time in. So we do have some people like that that come up here and there, and we really put a lot of energy and time into them, and they do become all stars and a big part of our team. But that's a basic week what it looks like.
What does the future look like for you as you think about the next few years? Obviously you've grown a lot and built a lot, and so what are you thinking for the future?
Yeah, so definitely continuing to develop the construction development business, buying more land, buying, developing, hopefully bigger and bigger developments, but also getting into more so social media. I mean, we're already in social media and do digital marketing and SEO and all that kind of stuff, but we're in the process of starting our own podcast, so hopefully you can be a guest on ours.
Sweet.
But that I think is the way the world is going. I'm not a social media podcast, I'm a very private person in the trenches working, but you have to do it these days and it's super important. And being a big on social media and marketing and having a podcast can kind of feed everything else. So I think that's the direct what we're going to focus on.
Thank you so much, Mateen, for coming on, sharing your story. For people that want to reach out to you or learn more about you or list with you, manage with you, whatever it might be, how can they do so?
Yeah, so I would say check out our website, plusrealtors.com, for the brokerage, and plusmanagers.com for the property management. And we're on all the major platforms: YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, etc.
I love those URLs. Those are fantastic. I'm a sucker for a good, easy to remember URL. So thank you so much for coming on, sharing your story, and best of luck as you continue to grow in the future.